Attention duelists, and welcome to the official channel for the premier Deckmaster format known as Domain. If you found this video, you've probably heard of the format and are wondering how to play. To get started, you and your friends need to choose your Deckmasters, which can be any monster in the game. Then you need to check its domain, which consists of attributes, types, and archetypes listed anywhere on the card. This determines what kind of monsters you can play in your main and extra deck, and once you've done that, it's time to build. Domain decks require 1 Deckmaster, a 60 card main deck, and a 0 to 15 card extra deck. Once that's together, it's time to duel. Each game begins with all players presenting their Deckmasters and deciding who's going first. Once decided, each player opens their 5-card hand, and then the turn player gets to kick off the game by drawing their 6th. The Masquerade player then can perform actions like they normally would, summoning Aluber, the Jesper of Despia, searching Despia, Theater of the Branded, and then fusion summoning their Deckmaster, using materials from their hand or field. But wait, isn't fusion summoning from the extra deck? While in the Deckmaster zone, monsters can ignore from the hand and face down extra deck clauses on summoning conditions, like normal summons, inherent summons, XYZ, Synchro, Link, and even Pendulum, as well as proper game mechanic summons like Fusion and Ritual. This is not the case for ignition and trigger effects, which can be determined if the card has a colon or semicolon in the part that would summon it. Extra deck pendulum monsters cannot be pendulum summoned or activated from the Deckmaster zone, while their main deck counterparts can. After that, it looks like the Masquerade player is going to set 1 in the Spell and Trap zone, and then pass the turn to the Sophia player. And they're wasting no time as they set 3 back row and activate a ritual spell to summon Saphira, Divine Dragon of the Voiceless Voice. Then it looks like they're going to pass the turn. And you might be asking, why didn't they attack? Because in a game with 3 or more players, the last person in turn order gets the first battle phase. Now it's off to the Black Rose Dragon player, and they're going to start strong with a Harpy's Feather Duster. You might be wondering, how does a card like this work in a multiplayer setting? In Domain, activating cards or effects that say your opponent require you to target opponent as an additional cost to activation, while cards that say all, each, or both work the same way they would in a 1v1. You might have noticed that both players were paying life points due to Masquerade's cost effect. That's because continuous effects apply to all players and resources that meet its requirements, if any. Returning to the game, we can see that they targeted the Sophia player's back row and is going to move forward with Rose Dragon plays. But it doesn't look like they're going to full combo because the UFO player is going to drop an Ash Blossom as Chain Link 2. Just in case you're not familiar with how simultaneous effects go on chain in Yu-Gi-Oh!, it starts with the turn player's mandatory effects, the non-turn player's mandatory effects, the turn player's optional effects, and then the non-turn player's optional effects. The only difference in Domain is that priority is passed to each player following current turn order. In the most recent interaction, it went A, the Black Rose player, B, the UFO player, C, the Masquerade player, and then D, the Sophia player. They didn't activate effects though, so the chain just resolved between player B and A. Continuing the Black Rose player's turn, they decide to synchro summon Black Rose Moonlight Dragon, activating its effect to bounce Masquerade back to the extra deck, in turn triggering Aluber to special summon and negate Black Rose Moonlight's effect, as well as triggering another informative lesson, like what happens when your Deckmaster moves from one zone type to another. There is a priority sequence where each player can choose to call their Deckmaster back to the Deckmaster zone after all chains have resolved and before returning to open game state. Be careful though, each time you call your Deckmaster back there will be an additional cost to summon it of 500 life points for every time they've been returned to the Deckmaster zone. But if you don't call it back, you won't get another chance to do so until it moves between zone types again. At this point it looks like the Black Rose player is going to set 1 and pass. It looks like the UFO player is going for the classic draw, standby, normal summon, and go right into the battle phase technique. Declaring on the Black Rose Moonlight Dragon. When the Masquerade player gets priority, he's going to activate Super Polymerization, taking his Aluber, the Jester of Despia, and Black Rose Moonlight Dragon. Since this was on attack declaration, it's going to initiate a replay, and it's good to mention that in Domain, if the number of monsters on any opponent's fields change during an attack declaration, a replay will occur. And the UFO Turtle's going to take that replay, crashing into Saphira, triggering not only his effect, but the Mahama the Fairy Dragon in the Black Rose player's hand. Now for one final, how does that work? Mahama the Fairy Dragon can affect yourself or whoever the turn player is. So let's look at something a little more simple like Mirror Force, that just says when an opponent's monster declares an attack, effects must apply to the player or the resources of the player who met the activation requirement, meaning you can't Mirror Force a player that isn't attacking, and in Mahama's case, you wouldn't be able to deal damage to someone except for the person whose turn it is. There are exceptions to this, like cards that don't require an opponent to perform the action, or cards that say that they don't have to target or affect your opponent's cards. Cards like Jelly Cannon just say when a monster declares an attack, you can target one monster on the field and shuffle it into the deck. And of course there are cards with activation requirements very similar to the Heavy Storm example that are just going to affect everything anyways. The same logic applies to activating cards and ignition effects. For these you have to target the player who met the condition that made activating it possible. And in great Yu-Gi-Oh fashion, it's your choice if tied. Now that we've got that out of the way and nobody's building any new chains, the UFO player can call back his Deckmaster to be summoned at a later date for an additional 500 life points. And that wraps up the gist of domain-specific interactions. These duelists will continue playing until there's one person left in the game. Now you and your friends are ready to go play some Domain. And don't be afraid to take the game into your own hands. We've seen people play with different card pools like Goat and Edison, as well as even implement rules like speed counters from 5Ds. And if you haven't already, I'd highly recommend trying some games with Speed Duel skill cards.